record. Hi, everybody. So yeah, the exam is over. If you haven't seen, I know some of you have because I've already gotten not quite a flood, but let's say a trickle of emails about various things related to the exam. I did grade them. You can find your grades on Moodle. You could, I suppose, look now, but we're not going to talk about it until the end of class, but then we will talk about it at the end of class. So remind me, let's say a quarter of, like 8:45, we can switch over to the exam. We can go through each question and go over any questions that you guys have. And of course, I'm open to emails and conversations too. So, all right, we're starting a new part of the class. Let me get the syllabus going, as I sometimes do. So as you might remember, this class is broken up into 3 parts, and we just finished part 1. So congratulations on finishing part 1. You should be very proud of yourselves. And as you can see, this was focusing on the life of the Buddha, what I'm calling early Buddhism. There are a few different ways to talk about this. You could call it mainstream Buddhism, or maybe like Orthodox Buddhism, something like that. Just it's basically thinking, what was the life of the Buddha all about? Almost every Buddhist knows the life of the Buddha. Everybody agrees that the Buddha had an important life. They might disagree about some of the details, right? There's some of the details in the book that we read that not every Buddhist group would endorse. So even with this life of the Buddha, there are some variations. But in general, everybody agrees the Buddha is important, the Dharma, the Sangha, the Four Noble Truths, right? And that's what we covered in this first part of the class, obviously with some flair and with some other details. Come on in, everybody. So we just finished with that, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Now we're at a new part, and this is where things get a little more interesting. It's not saying the first part is uninteresting, but this is where I get to kind of take you down pathways that maybe other teachers would not take you down. So today we're talking about the greater vehicle, and that might be sort of a weird term to you, but it'll make sense by the end of class, hopefully. We're going to talk about meditation. So that's obviously an important part of Buddhism, and that might be why some of you are taking this class, is because you have meditated before, maybe you like to meditate. This part, maybe you weren't expecting, is magic and modernism. This is sort of hot stuff in Buddhist studies right now. People are having debates about this. These are both pretty new books, like they came out within the last couple of years. So that'll be an experimental part of the course. Hopefully you enjoy it. And then we'll get some ghosts. Tantric Buddhism is yet another kind of Buddhism. And then we'll think about hierarchy and power. And then we'll take another exam. So today we're starting week 7. The next exam will be week 12. We'll have a reading response in between. But as you can tell, I kind of am trusting you guys to take care of the work, right? And maybe you have noticed now, I mean, I tried to warn you, but now you hopefully can tell that you will be tested to see if you're doing the work, right? This is college, and that's how college works, is I give you an assignment and I expect you to do it. I'm not going to necessarily look over your shoulder every day to make sure you're doing it, but by the time the exam rolls around, you either are kind of on the bus or you are not, right? And again, we'll talk about the exam grades and so forth at the end of class. So we're going to keep a similar pace. We're going to keep reading. Hopefully it doesn't feel like too much reading. Like today, it was 26 pages. Is that right? Yeah. So I don't know. Is that a lot? I feel like for a class that meets only twice a week, that's actually a pretty small number. Don't you guys agree? Next class will be 14 pages, right? So that's even smaller, but it'll be harder reading too, because that'll be a translation. So you'll need to go through it a bit more slowly. So anyways, we're going to keep up with kind of the same pace. Hopefully, that you guys don't feel too overwhelmed with midterms and that sort of stuff. I know it's getting to be crunch time in the year. And so, just keep your head up. It'd be nice if we had a spring break. As you notice, we don't have a spring break. And so I think we're all kind of feeling that. Spring break would be around now, right, in the next few weeks. And so that's one thing. We'll have Easter. So that's coming at the beginning of April, but that's a whole month away. So, as you're thinking about how to keep your spirits up and keep your head up. That will be one challenge. That'll be actually a major challenge for this part of the course. But you can do it. We'll do it together. And then finally, the last part of the course will go very quickly. We'll basically just read this book, Novice to Master. We'll talk about early Chinese Buddhism. We'll talk about Zen Buddhism in modern Japan. And then you'll write a paper and it's done. As you can see, there's one more exam. There is no final exam. And I did that on purpose, right? So this will force you to keep working hard for the next 6 weeks to prepare for the next exam, right? Do the reading, come to class, pay attention, but things will kind of taper off at the end. It's not like I'm giving you a free pass or anything, but it's basically just read a book, write a paper, talk about Zen, right? So it'll be, when some of your other classes are really crunching in these last few weeks, this class will be a little easier. So any questions about the plans? How's that sound? Sound good? So not a lot of stuff to do except just keep coming to class, keep up with the reading. That's the way I designed it. Chat, you guys good? You look like you're good. Obviously, if you ever have questions, let me know. So here are a few new words. Buddhism that we looked at so far, like I said, we could call kind of a mainstream Buddhism. We could call it early Buddhism, which mostly developed where? Where does Buddhism start? Close, yeah. The Buddha's birthplace is Lumbini, which is, I believe, in modern day Nepal. I've never been there. It's kind of right on the border, actually, with Nepal, between Nepal and another country. India, yeah, very good. So yeah, the Buddha is from northern India, very close to Nepal, kind of the Himalayan foothill areas, but he spends most of his life wandering around India. So that's a good place to think of. When you think about the beginnings of Buddhism, it's good to think India. Now, so most of what we studied so far, we could think about as taking place in India, but as you can see from our map, something kind of weird happens, right? India is gray. You see that? Now, I imagine you guys are all good map readers. Why is India gray on this map? What does that imply? And this may come as a surprise to you, which is why you're all dumbfounded. I guess all dumbfounded by this map. Why is it gray? The dominant religion is not Buddhism. So that's very nicely stated. We don't want to go as far as saying maybe there's no Buddhism in India, which would be true. Saying there's no Buddhism in India would be false. In America, there's also Buddhism, right? On a map like this, it might come up as gray because Buddhism is not a dominant religion here. But Buddhism mostly dies out in India. Around 1,000 years ago, Buddhism mostly disappears from India. I'll let that sink in for a moment. So what's happening in the world about 1,000 years ago? What are the dominant religions of India now? Hinduism is a big one. What's another big one? Islam, it is. Yeah. So when we look at South Asia, when you look at this part of the world, Pakistan's over here, India's over here, Bangladesh over here. The dominant religions are Hinduism and Islam. Buddhism and Hinduism kind of exist side by side for a while, but it kind of gets absorbed into Hinduism in a funny way. It's a little hard to separate them from each other, in fact. As we saw in the book we read, right? Were there elements of Hinduism in the life story of the Buddha that we read? I see some heads nodding. What sort of examples do you see, Connor? Well, there's Hindu gods. Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was thinking too. And so when you read that, you might be thinking, wait, isn't this Hindu? Aren't they supposed to not like each other? And that's one reason I put it on the exam. One of the questions was about the gods, is because, the Hollywood version leaves it out. Most presentations of Buddhism leave the gods out, but the gods are really important. They're a big part of Buddhism. And they share that with Hinduism. And that's okay, right? Different religions don't always have to hate each other. They also start to hate each other at different times. They argue with each other and that sort of stuff, but they also share a lot too. And so I wanted to emphasize that for you. So anyways, what happens to Buddhism in India? It mostly kind of gets absorbed into Hinduism, and also Islam comes. And Islam, especially during the pre-British Empire, right, like the Mughal Empire and that sort of stuff. Taj Mahal, you guys know Taj Mahal? So that's all built by these Muslim rulers. So India was a very Muslim place for a while, and then I think the British started to push back against that. So, anyways, that's a whole nother story. But it goes to show Buddhism kind of disappears from India, but it spreads all over the world, right? This is a map kind of the contemporary world. As you can see, Japan gets cut off, but Japan would be the same yellow color here on the right side. Orange in the middle, and then red in Southeast Asia. We're not going to talk too much about Theravada. Actually, no, that's not true. I take that back. We will talk about Theravada in terms of ghosts, but Theravada kind of presents itself as this more conservative Buddhist tradition. It's more like the mainstream Buddhism we were just talking about. There are differences. A lot of this mindfulness stuff is related to Theravada. So, maybe it's my bias. I spent more time thinking about these other traditions, so that's what we'll focus on. But I would also say the first things we learned in the semester, a lot of it is kind of the foundational ideas for Theravada. Mahayana is what we read about for today, the greater vehicle. We'll get into this. Very simply put, there's this new emphasis on compassion and wisdom, which you probably noticed already. We talked about those vows that the Buddha takes. So it's not like they come out of nowhere, but they get sort of expanded. And then finally, Vajrayana. Vajra is this very hard metal material. So some people call it adamantine vehicle. And it has this emphasis on ritual and power. And this is where kind of the magic stuff comes in. So as you can see, these are almost like, different sects of Buddhism, but it's a little bigger than that. You guys know the word sect, S-E-C-T, right? There are different sects of Buddhism. Within, I guess, how should I put this? Sects are these very sort of concrete units where I can talk about my teacher, my teacher's teacher, my teacher's teacher, and I'm part of this lineage, that sort of thing. This is bigger than that, right? This is like entire theories and ways of looking at the world. I think if this were Europe, these would just be called different religions, but because it's Asia, they get lumped together and they get called all the same religion, but that's another conversation. So today we will be talking about the greater vehicle. Any questions so far? How's this all sound? Okay. All right, so what's the deal with the greater vehicle? There are new developments. First of all, the bodhisattva. You might say, hey, I know that word. You guys know this word? Who's the bodhisattva that we've met so far? Yeah, maybe I'll do some drawing. Let's see. I'll get the camera going so you guys can see. I remember this board is sort of horrible. It's hard to see stuff, but we'll try. So, all right. So Jocelyn got us started with this idea of being on a path to enlightenment. Bodhisattva is talking about a path to enlightenment, right? It's a being who's on this path to enlightenment. Let's say Buddhahood is the goal. The goal is to become a Buddha, right? We can put that at the top. A lot of the time in this sort of mainstream version of Buddhism, we look at ourselves and we think, I'm this very small little person and I'm so unenlightened, and look how great the Buddha is. And, look at Gautami doing all these miracles and all that sort of stuff, right? There's a bit of a gap where I think I'm all the way over here and the Buddha's all the way over there. And the Buddha was on the path to enlightenment, so we could call him a bodhisattva, but it doesn't really apply to me, right? I'm just this regular old guy. Maybe I can try to get a better life, right? And how do I get a better life? Is by doing good karma, right? That was on the exam. Things about making good moral choices, that sort of thing. But there's a little bit of a gap between me and the Buddha. I don't have the ambition necessarily required to be the Buddha. He just feels so far away, right? So that's what we might call the lesser vehicle, is someone who's just, they feel like the gap between them and the Buddha is a bit too far. what happens with the greater vehicle is rather than this term bodhisattva only referring to the Buddha to be, there's a sense that we all can become bodhisattvas. Not just, the really special rock star people. I'm going to put us at the bottom. There are in fact different kind of stages on the path. There are 10 of them. Is that 10? Anyways, imagine that it's 10. And each of these stages are there. You don't have to know this, but they're called grounds, right? But anybody who's on this path is called a bodhisattva. So again, it's not a new idea. It's not a new concept, right? It was a concept that used to only apply to this one particular person. If we compare it to Christianity, for example, there's God up here, there's Jesus who's kind of close to God, and then there's us. And then there's this kind of unbridgeable gap, right? Where we're all sinners. Forgive me for my theological clumsiness, but and this is my understanding, there's sort of an unbridgeable gap between the divine and the human, right? And we do the best we can, but they're over there and we're over here, and that's just how it is. But here, for the greater vehicle, they bridge that gap. To put it in psychological terms, you're almost encouraged to become some sort of messiah or have a messiah complex, right? These bodhisattvas try to become Buddhas. This is what the greater vehicle is. It's saying this is how you become a Buddha, not someone else. You're not reading the life story of someone else. This is for you. You can do it too, right? Which might feel exciting, but also a little intimidating. I don't know. There are a lot of implications that come from this very simple idea, linking us, the regular unenlightened people, to Buddhahood. Okay, questions about that? So this is the new ideal practitioner. If the old ideal practitioner was just like a monk, someone who stays in the woods and tries not to do any harm and that sort of stuff, all of a sudden we have more ambitious Buddhas, or let's say more ambitious Buddhist practitioners come onto the scene. With this new ambition comes a new path, right? What was the path called before? You had the Four Noble Truths. Eightfold Path. Very good. Yeah, I was pointing to that. So they kind of de-emphasize the Eightfold Path. That's still important. Nobody would say, forget about the Eightfold Path. But now there's sort of a new path. And it's a new list. And it's even shorter. It's easier to remember. The 6 perfections. And so this is a new list of virtues that get emphasized. And again, there's a sense as you go through these virtues and as you develop them, you get closer to Buddhahood. There's also new philosophy. So we could do a whole course on Buddhist philosophy, and some people do. Maybe you can tell from the way I teach this class, it's not really my emphasis. It's just, I don't know, the way I learned Buddhism, the way I teach Buddhism is more through stories. And I think within those stories, there is some philosophy. Obviously, I don't leave it out, right? We had the Four Noble Truths and so forth. But at the same time, there is so much Buddhist philosophy, it will boggle your mind, right? And so there's this new philosophy, the middle way philosophy. So obviously, this term you probably remember, middle way, right? But now it gets applied not just to morality, right? How is the middle way applied to morality? Just a quick review. How does the middle way apply to morality? Jocelyn? And what are the 2 extremes? Very good. Asceticism and indulgence. You successfully memorized the thing that I tried to force you to memorize. Very good. Yes. And so again, I think there's value in that. I'm calling it moral because it has to do with the moral choices you make in your life, right? You follow me so far? So it's basically just, how do you live your life? This is new. Now it's applying that same idea, this avoidance of extremes, but it's applying it to philosophy. It's thinking about how do things exist. One extreme would say things exist as they appear to exist. There's some sort of essential reality. Another extreme would say nothing exists. Everything is just an illusion, right? And the Buddhists kind of they try to fall in the middle. In reality, just like the middle way, the moral middle way, where they kind of veer toward asceticism, this one also veers toward nihilism. But it presents itself, at least, as not fully falling into that trap, although some people certainly do. Okay, so that's just kind of an overview of what is new with the greater vehicle. Now we can go into some details about them. All right, so this, I already went into some detail saying how it links us unenlightened people all the way up to the Buddha, and everything is between. It's called a bodhisattva. So you might be wondering, okay, Bill, I like this idea of becoming a Buddha. How do I sign up? How do I become a bodhisattva? And you, with 3 low payments of $9.99, you could become a bodhisattva today. No, you don't have to pay me anything. But all you have to do is take the bodhisattva vow. And again, I emphasized this before, right? Do you guys remember the vow that the Buddha took before he came to Earth? What did he say? He wants to end all suffering. Pretty simple, right? That is the bodhisattva vow. That's why I emphasize it. Except it's not just the Buddha saying it. Now we can say it. And people do say this prayer. It's one reason why I'm showing you this vow ceremony in Dharamsala, which is in India. Here are some Buddhists who actually are in India. Can you tell who that is on the throne in the middle there? The Dalai Lama, yeah. So he has really taught a lot about bodhisattvas. He's given many people the bodhisattva vows, where people vow to end suffering, not just for themselves, but for all sentient beings. This is kind of a special Buddhist phrase. I'll write in the chat. All sentient beings. What does it mean to be sentient? That's sort of a special Buddhist term. What's sentient? Yeah. That's a very thorough explanation. Did you take another class? Okay, I like it. Was it like a philosophy class or something? About animals. Oh, interesting. And so was the takeaway that animals are also sentient? Yeah, say it again. It's a right now. Okay. Yeah, and so an interesting question is, are plants sentient? Did you guys talk about that? Plants are not sentient. Yeah, I would agree with that, right? Another way to think about it, the way the Buddhists put it, the Tibetan word is semjen, semjen tamje. Semjen just means someone with a mind, a being that has a mind, right? And so do plants have minds? Maybe they do. I don't know. There is some talk that plants kind of react to stimuli and stuff like that, but I don't have a dog in that fight. But in any case, for the Buddhists, there are 6 classes of sentient beings, one of which includes us, right? We're the humans. What are some of the other sentient beings that we've encountered? Gods, animals. I know you can come up with at least a few more. Hungry ghosts, they were on the exam, yeah. Hell beings. Titans, good, yeah, very good. So we got all of them. So those are the sentient beings. And when the Buddhists talk about all sentient beings, it includes all of them. It's not even just us. It's not just humans. So we want to end suffering for all sentient beings. I said a moment ago that you're almost intentionally developing a Messiah complex, and maybe that makes more sense now, right? Because you're basically, what it means to be a bodhisattva is to dedicate your life to all other beings. Still want to sign up? So radical compassion, what does that mean? It's basically what we're describing, right? It's wanting to, the language that's often used is to free beings from suffering and the causes of suffering, and then also give them happiness and the causes of happiness. Pretty nice, right? Pretty nice. And radical wisdom is more the philosophy side of things, right? So it's seeing the world accurately. One thing we've talked about before is that everything's impermanent. Remember that? Remember impermanence? And so wisdom would see that impermanence, would see things as they exist, would see all these different connections between things. And also there's this idea of emptiness that comes up, which we'll probably run out of time before we get to, but we can cover it next time. And then finally, bodhicitta. This is from the reading. Obviously, all of this is from the reading. Maybe not obviously, but all this is from the reading. This, you might see the Bodhi is the same as Bodhisattva, but we got a new thing after it. Chitta means mind. So this is the mind of enlightenment, the thought of enlightenment. And this I think is Kyon's language, is just saying it's the feeling you have when you become a bodhisattva, right? It's not just some empty phrase that you say, yeah, I'll help all the beings, whatever, who really cares, right? It's got to come from your heart. It's got to come from the depths of your mind. And part of becoming a bodhisattva is developing this motivation. Maybe you've met inspiring, motivated people before who are constantly trying to help people and are just sort of saintly type figures, and you might feel like that's like a really good person. I'll never be as good as that person, but that's a really good person, right? What the Buddhists are saying is, yes, you can, right? You have to work at it, though. You have to try to develop this heart. And there are ways to do that, to generate the mind of enlightenment. There's a verb that is often associated with this, is you generate this mind of enlightenment through sometimes lifetimes of effort, right? It doesn't just come easily. Okay, I know I'm dropping a lot of words on you, but any questions about all of this? Do you have a decent sense of what a bodhisattva is now, what they're trying to do? Trying to achieve enlightenment. So again, this only applied to Siddhartha so far, right? Shakyamuni Buddha, Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha. We called him the bodhisattva throughout the book. Now with the greater vehicle, we can be bodhisattvas too. How do you do it? Here are those 6 perfections that I talked about before, these virtues that are to be perfected along the path. So you might be wondering, okay, how do I do it, right? How do I achieve enlightenment? How do I help all the people? And these are the 6 things that it gets narrowed down to. So generosity, kind of an interesting one to start with. Have we talked about generosity before? I don't know if I've used this word with you yet, but we have talked about it a little bit. Where has generosity shown up in Buddhism so far? Generosity. What is a common practice for lay people? Brendan? Giving beggars food. Yeah, and who are the beggars? Monks. Yeah, so giving monks food. It became kind of a major part of Buddhism, right? A defining feature of how the lay people and the monastic community interact with each other is through this exchange of food. So it makes sense that generosity is the first one, particularly for lay people, but really for anybody. Be generous, right? Don't take what is not given to you, and give freely and openly, right? I think you can probably look into your own life, different times where you're told to be generous, but this is taken to an extreme, to the point where it's just like, you know, you want the shirt on my back? No problem, it's yours, right? Since it's called a perfection, there's a sense that this can go so far and so deeply. In fact, there's a whole story called where the Buddha in a previous life was a prince called Visantara. Maybe you don't know the story, but it's basically, it takes this idea of generosity to an extreme. It's like, well, what if somebody was so generous they gave everything away? What would that person's life look like? And that is this story. So if you use your imagination, you might think, okay, well, he gives away, he's a prince, right? He gives away all of his precious things as a prince. There's a special elephant he gives away. Everybody gets mad at him. They send him out of the castle. They're like, dude, you're too generous. You can't stay here. You're gonna ruin us, right? And so he gets thrown out. Eventually, he gives his children away to a greedy Brahmin. I told you there's some fighting between the Buddhists and the Hindus. He gives his children away. He gives his wife away, which again, we get some misogyny, we get some patriarchy going on there. And then finally, he gives his own eyes. Somebody comes up to him, a blind Brahmin comes up to him and says, hey, can I get your eyes? Because he has a sense like he'll do some sort of magic trick and make himself be able to see using Vasantara's eyes. And Vasantara says, yeah, no problem. He scoops him on out, gives him to the Brahmin. And so he's this blind, lonely man. And of course, the gods come in and restore his sight, and everybody lives happily ever after. But it is this interesting thought exercise about how far generosity can go, right? You guys might be pretty generous people, but you're probably not giving up your eyes. You're probably not giving up your children, right? And again, this idea of giving up your own family is a pretty disturbing thought in a lot of ways. But I would argue there's something almost useful about it. right? Because again, the Buddhists want to emphasize this importance of non-attachments, right? When these cravings, these overwhelming attachments dominate our lives. And where is that more obvious than with your family? Right? Even though it's a story, it's not saying you should really give away your children, but it's allowing you to think about, what if I did, right? What if I did? What would that be like? All right, maybe not as much detail required for these other ones, but morality, just ethical discipline, right? Just being an ethical person, being kind to people and not being mean to people, knowing how to act in different situations. Patience is an interesting one. There's a sense of, it's not just like, patience is a virtue. You're waiting in the doctor's office or whatever. This is more like forbearance, where you're willing to take on great sufferings for the sake of this path, for the sake of other sentient beings. Turn the other cheek kind of language, right? It ties in with a lot of what Jesus was teaching too, where if somebody harms you, you can be patient, right? That's the term that's being used here. If somebody harms you, you take the pain, you take the hit, you take the loss, and you say, all right, you're still my friend, right? I don't hate you for being so unkind to me. And so there's a great depth of patience that's possible. Courage, or maybe we could call this determination, right? Being willing to work very hard and develop the bravery, perhaps is another word, necessary to continue on this path. Meditation, we'll talk about more later, but it's basically being able to focus your mind, being able to, again, use your mental capacities in the ways that you want to use them. And then finally, wisdom is related to seeing things as they are, right? Seeing reality as it really exists and not getting caught up in these various illusions. So here's the new path, right? Rather than the eightfold path, now we've got this bodhisattva path. And as I've already told you, there are many stories that develop around these, many scriptures. Some of the most famous scriptures in the world are called the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras, the Prajnaparamita Sutras. And so built around these virtues are entirely new worlds, philosophies, ways of thinking, ways of being. And so it's a very fundamental shift in Buddhist thought. Again, we already went over this, but an ordinary bodhisattva is someone who's taken the vow. You take the vow and you kind of go on to the path, right? It means you are now a bodhisattva. Doesn't mean you're very high bodhisattva, but you're on the path. But there are some bodhisattvas who have trained in the six perfections and have sort of gone up along these stages of the bodhisattva path. And there are some who are pretty high up, and then there's some who are so high up, they're like at this last little rung, and there's only a tiny little bit separating them from Buddhahood, and they decide to stop there, at least for the time being. Why would someone do that? Why would one of these very advanced bodhisattvas decide to stop here and not pass completely into Buddhahood? What happens when you become fully enlightenment? What happens at the Buddha's final enlightenment? What does final enlightenment mean? Come on, you just took an exam on this. How is final enlightenment different from the enlightenment he achieved under the tree? Brennan? He died. He was gone, right? It's the end of suffering. It's the end of, maybe we can say, corporeal existence, right? He doesn't exist in our world anymore. He's gone. So why do you think somebody would forestall that? Why would they stop at this very highest point and say, I'm not going to take this final step into final enlightenment? What do they want to do first before they go? End suffering for whom? Because crossing over would end suffering for them, right? Whose suffering are they going to end? Everyone else, exactly. So there's this kind of interesting logic that develops where there's this type of being who is also called a bodhisattva. Sometimes they're called a great bodhisattva or a noble bodhisattva. There are other adjectives that get assigned to them, but they're basically these bodhisattvas that are way up here, almost fully enlightened. They can do these miracles. They can have all this really incredible understanding. Obviously, they perfected all of these things that we just talked about, very patient, courageous, amazing people. But they decide not to take this final step into Buddhahood because they can stay here and help people. So if you look up Bodhisattva in the dictionary, you might find that definition. Here's a very famous one. We can call this figure Guanyin. It's a little easier to say. That's the Chinese name. In Japanese, this figure is called Kannon. Avalokiteshvara in Sanskrit, Chenrezig in Tibetan. So really across many different cultures, this is probably the single most important bodhisattva, I dare say. There are other important ones, but this is a very, very important one. Would you say, what gender would you say this image is? Let's do a little gender analysis. Who says this is a woman? Who says
I think it's a woman.
Colin said woman. Anybody say man? Interesting. It's kind of, you can't really tell. It's a bit of a trick question. This is a transition period for Avalokiteshvara. It's around 1,000 years ago. Avalokiteshvara comes from India. Again, if we look back at our map, comes from India. There are big mountains here, so it kind of goes around Tibet, across Central Asia, down into China, into Korea, into Japan. And as all this is happening, this figure changes. In India, this is a man. In India, it's a male bodhisattva, let's say. In China, he becomes a she, and it's around this time, 1,000 years ago, where that transition happens. So this figure is a very interesting one. You know, you'll get like teams of art historians squinting at images of Avalokiteshvara saying, "Are those breasts? Is that a mustache?" You know, again, it's sort of it's hard to tell. I would agree. I think this is a woman. This is a very famous pose, sort of this relaxed position. If you ever go to the Met, have you guys been to the Met before? I believe this is from the Met. I used to take students to the Met, and I would try to give sort of previews in class. I've given up on all of that now. Although you can go. I'm not going to give you extra credit to go just because I feel like it's a health hazard. But I encourage you to go. Maybe when the pandemic's done, you should go. You can check it out. So anyways, new bodhisattvas. One example is this bodhisattva, Guanyin, otherwise known as Avalokiteshvara. Oh yeah, here we go. All the different names, bodhisattva of compassion. One way to think about her/him is it's a savior for those in trouble. So if you're traveling, a lot of people say prayers to Avalokiteshvara. If you are going to be executed, or there's like a fire, or somehow your life is in danger, people pray to her. When Christian missionaries came, they called her the goddess of mercy. When you see this image, is this a familiar image in a Catholic school? A holy mother holding a holy baby? You ever seen that before? Once or twice, yeah, kind of a familiar image. And why is Guanyin holding a holy baby here? Well, people pray to Guanyin for babies. I actually went to the island. There's a place in Southeast China called Putuoshan, which is dedicated to her. It's like the entire island is like Guanyin Disneyland. And it's sort of interesting. Buddhism is mostly tourism in China, right? It's sort of, that's a bit of an overstatement, but it's hard to find people really taking religion seriously in China. But I thought this was a very special island, and people really did take it seriously there. And one of the most popular places was like this back room of a temple where people were just lined up. And I was like, what's everybody lined up for? And they're all going to visit Songzi Guanyin, which is the Guanyin that gives male children. People pray to her to have a son. That becomes a very common practice. So you might imagine, Bill, that sounds like praying to a god or something like that. And I would say, yes, you're right? As you can see, it sort of begins with this idea of a path to enlightenment and that sort of stuff. But again, the normal unenlightened people who just want to have a child, who just want to do well on their exams, who just want to get good crops and that sort of stuff, they pray to these bodhisattvas because they're there to help us, right? That's sort of the point. And so they say, please help me, right? Give me some help. I need it. And so anyways, that's the figure that Guanyin, or that's the role that Guanyin starts to take on. I do have actually a ton of videos. I watched all of these last night. I'd seen them before, but I kind of reminded myself, maybe we can watch a little bit to just get a little taste of what Guanyin's all about.
这是一个小孩与月亮的故事，也是一位法师与观音的故事。故事开始，在一条好长好长的江边，在一个有月亮的晚上。
听到了吗？月亮为什么总跟着我跑呢？
孩子，那是因为我在守护着你。你现在还不明白，但总有一天你会明白的。
So again, we won't watch this whole thing, but even just from this little clip, you can see. The title disappeared. This is the story of Master Sheng Yen, guided by Guanyin Bodhisattva, right? So again, we know what a bodhisattva is now. This is talking about one of these really advanced bodhisattvas. It's Guanyin, it's a bodhisattva of compassion. And even as a young child, or at least so the story goes, even as a young child, this person, his name again is Master Sheng Yen. You can probably predict he becomes a Buddhist teacher. But the way the story goes is he felt this closeness to Guanyin. And even though this is the life story of a Chinese Buddhist master who passed away really just a few years ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, the way it's told is Guanyin is always looking out for him. He goes through hardships, he struggles, he has various trials and difficulties, but there's this sense like Guanyin is in the background, almost like the gods in the life story of the Buddha, right? Remember I gave you an exam question about that. What role do the gods play? Most of you, the ones who answered that question, most of you were not able to really articulate it. The best that people did was something like, the gods helped him. And that, that was good enough. I gave you full points for that. But we see something very similar happening here, right? Where there's a sense that rather than just gods, now we have these bodhisattvas in the background. And they function a lot like the gods. Obviously, we can draw this whole chart and say how, no, they're not gods. There's something very different. But effectively, they work like gods, right? That's what happens with this greater vehicle in particular. And so she's in the background helping him, guiding him, not necessarily like intervening quite as directly as the gods did, but there's a sense like she is in the background. And it's kind of on purpose. Let's see, is it this one? Yeah. Here's a little sense of what it's like to be a little monk. He comes in, he is chanting for his teacher. As you can see, here's Guanyin in the background, and he's having a hard time.
佛法赞檀香佛，师父，对不起，我忘了。
去拜观世音菩萨吧，拜了就好了。
是的，师父。
常静听了老。
So as you can see from that little exchange, there are sort of these two sides of Buddhism that develop. On the one side, there's this more scholastic Buddhism, where your mean teacher forces you to memorize text. Does that sound familiar? No, I don't make you guys memorize things. If you became a monk, you'd have to remember every word of the text. You memorize the entire damn thing, and your entire education is reciting these texts back to your teacher. Unimaginable, right? Unimaginably difficult. But if you practice, you will get good at it. It's not that hard. I'm sure you guys have at least attempted to memorize things before. Have you ever memorized things before? It's useful. One thing I discovered, again, spending time in China, is memorizing some songs, memorizing some poems. It's a fun thing to take out at a party. It's like everybody's drunk and you're all having a good time. What do? You start singing some songs. Have you guys ever sung songs at a party? I'm sure you're all cringing just thinking about it. No, maybe some of you have before, but it's actually a lot of fun. It's a big part of what it means to just sort of be social in, I say China, but with Chinese communities, with Tibetan communities, really across the board, as you go, have a big dinner, you get really drunk, and just hang out and sing songs, and basically go around the room, and everybody's sort of bashful at first, but by the end, it's a very good time. So anyways, that's sort of what's happening here. More scholastic, though. And another type of practice is just to go see the bodhisattvas and prostrate. Is that the word they use? In Chinese, is bai. How do they translate bai for? Yeah, prostrate yourself. Do you know what it means to prostrate? We're not talking about prostate. Prostate cancer, very different thing. Prostrate is where, I'm not going to do it, but you say a prayer, you often touch 3 parts of your body and then put your head on the ground. And it's a way of showing respect to a god or sometimes even a person, bodhisattva, whatever you want to be. So sometimes students prostrate in front of their teachers too. So I could show you a lot more. That was just one clip. There are actually 6. Actually, there's one more thing I do want to show you because this might actually blow some of your minds. It's not this first one though. It's further down.
这是一个小孩。
It's maybe this one. No, I think it's even after that.
美浓闭关6年后，圣严法师出关回到中华佛教文化馆，已经在关房内做好赴日留学准备的圣严法师。
我们大家在一起，整整做了7天的梦，在这个梦中，一场梦而已。
So he came to America, and part of his sort of dream was to spread Buddhism to America.
在日本取得博士学位后，圣严法师应美国佛教会沈家珍居士的邀请，到纽约教学与弘法。
Is this familiar? Have I shown you guys this front of a temple before? Is this far away from us? No, this is like 10 blocks away from us. It's kind of crazy. I knew who Master Shengyan was, and I knew what the Temple of Enlightenment was, but before watching this, I had not put that together. I was like, oh my God, that's down the street from us. So that did blow my mind when I saw it. And this is in the 70s when this sort of architecture was in style. You get these sort of hippie folks walking in.
并在大觉寺协助处理法务。有一天，2位年轻人走了进来。
Down the street from us.
师傅 do you know Kung Fu? Yes, I do. What kind of Kung Fu?
Anyway, we can stop there. But it goes to show this is sort of a hilarious story about Buddhism coming to America. As they said in the film, Master Shengyan did a PhD in Japan too. So he had a very full, very interesting life. And then he went on to Taiwan and really kind of things took off there for him. He was the founder of Dharma Drum Monastery, Dharma Drum Temple in Taiwan. And many elements dedicated to Avalokiteshvara, right? As you can tell, that was a biography. This is just a guy telling his life story, but part of it is basically him saying Guanyin Bodhisattva, Guanyin Pusa is there the whole time, right? Inspiring him, leading him, guiding him, giving him advice, and all that sort of stuff. So even this sort of personal way of storytelling still gives homage to Guanyin. It's almost like, you know, the many basketball players, Kyrie Irving and whoever else, talking about God sort of working through them. There's something very similar happening with bodhisattvas here. So as you can see, what began as sort of this sense of a figure who's just on the path to enlightenment, and as I've already emphasized, that, you know, could be us, right? We just have to take a vow and we're on that path. Once you get closer to Buddhahood, it becomes basically this godlike figure, right? Who is all knowing, all compassionate, and, you know, generally guiding us through this world of difficulty. Now, one thing that's important to keep in mind is these figures do not become all powerful in the sense that it's not their fault that bad stuff happens to us. I think that's an important part of Buddhism. They're able to avoid some of the problems that come with an all-powerful God, an all-loving, all-powerful God, because people are always frustrated. Why, God, why, right? Why me? Why did you do this to me? But with these bodhisattvas, you don't have to ask that question. Why, God, why? Is because everything's impermanent, right? Because everything's suffering. Like, you get that out of the way very early on in Buddhism. Manage those expectations, folks. Like, don't expect too much because this world is full of horrible suffering and things. But if you ever get helped out, you know where to look, right? Or if you ever need help, they might be able to help you. So kind of an interesting balance when compared to the Christian situation. Questions about Guanyin? How's that sound? You guys heard of her before? Avalokiteshvara. I saw something on Twitter. I never really looked into it, but you guys know the camera company Canon? It's a Japanese company. What I read at least is that it's based on this name, Canon. And if you look at early images from the company, they actually have images of this bodhisattva in the background. So you can look that up. Here's another figure you've probably seen before. Have you ever seen the fat Buddha before? And so this is sort of an American thing where like, oh yeah, the Buddha's fat. That's sort of funny, right? But of course, we haven't seen many fat Buddhas yet, have we? In fact, we saw an extremely skinny, emaciated Buddha. And you might be wondering, what's the deal with this Buddha? And there was a Chinese monk called Budai, who was sort of this happy fortune sort of figure. And people pray to this Budai bodhisattva figure basically for good fortune, right? He becomes almost like a good fortune bodhisattva, just like a good fortune god, right? And so why is he fat? Well, if you live during lean times where there's not enough food to eat, you might pray to the fat Buddha to be fat like him, you know. He's also sometimes associated with the Buddha of the future, because again, we had our Buddha, right? And he's gone. And he gave his teachings, and the teachings are steadily disappearing because they're impermanent too, right? This is actually a major problem for Buddhism, is they're thinking, all right, the teachings are getting worse and worse and worse as the time is going by. The blessings of the Buddha are moving deeper and deeper into the past. And so when things like a pandemic happen, that's how they explain it. Buddhists would say we're in an age of degeneration where we have lost touch with the blessings of the Buddha. We better read some Buddhist books or do various rituals to bring back those blessings. But there's no surprise that things get worse for the Buddhists. They expect things to get worse until the Buddha of the future comes. There'll be another Buddha, right? And then we'll all have a good time again. But until he comes, and his name is Maitreya, there is a sense that things are going to continue to get worse because we get further away from the Buddha. And I just added this as kind of an aside, but many figures have shown up and said, it's me, Maitreya, I'm the one, right? It's sort of like, Jesus being the Messiah, right? Some people say he was, some people say he wasn't. It's the difference between Jews and Christians, you could say. There's something similar happening here. The people are waiting for Maitreya to come, the next Buddha. And some people have showed up and said, yeah, that was me. And in fact, people have been doing this for hundreds of years, and I'm sure people are still doing it now. I think there's a whole Wikipedia list, I haven't looked at it in a while, but of people who have claimed to be Maitreya. And sometimes the fat Buddha is called Maitreya. So it's a very confusing image. I would argue it's basically just a monk who was fat and got associated with good fortune, but then some people associate with this Buddha of the future too. So he's sort of a confusing figure. If you see one and your parents are like, hey, you took a Buddhism class, what's the deal with the fat Buddha? You can just say, this is Budai. This is a monk who became a bodhisattva of fortune. There's a whole nother section I want to go over with you, but we only have 5 minutes before I promise to go over the exam. So why don't we look at this map and then we can transition. We can't see all of the details, but remember, Buddhism kind of starts in India. So here's this beginning place. They don't actually give you Lumbini, but Nepal is up here. So the Buddhas are born around here. And then it sort of spreads in all directions. It goes down to Sri Lanka, and then people bring it on boats to Southeast Asia. So this is sort of one Buddhist world, but it actually goes in this direction too. I gave you all those images from Gandhara, remember that? Northwest Pakistan. So Buddhism goes in this direction too. People cross this crazy desert. They also go over the Tibetan Plateau. This is very, very high mountains here, Himalayan mountains here. And then across the desert, into China, into Korea, into Japan. And you can get dates for when this is all happening. Most of this was happening around 2,000 years ago. That's when Buddhism first spreads to China. And the relationship between Korea, Japan, and China in terms of Buddhism is sort of complicated and interesting. What I've heard, what I understand is it actually really takes off in Korea. Korea, I think, is one of these really early centers for Buddhism. This map tells a slightly different story, saying that it comes later. But I think it wasn't as important in China until it really took off in Korea, spread to Japan, also spread to China. And again, people moving back and forth between these different centers as it develops for about 1,000 years. And then Buddhism comes to Tibet relatively late. And so this last phase, the Vajrayana, the esoteric Buddhism, is kind of this last phase of Buddhism. So it's very geographically dependent, right? We have one Buddhist world here, people sailing across the Bay of Bengal. We have one Buddhist world here that comes across Central Asia into East Asia. And then the final Buddhist world is here, which is between Mongolia and Tibet. And that's kind of the latest development. And so again, that kind of maps onto what we saw here, right? We've got this Bay of Bengal section, East Asia section, Central Asia section. Okay, next time we can do a little more historical stuff about spreading Buddhism beyond South Asia. But why don't we shift to exams? Any questions about all that? How's that? I know I talked a lot. I'll get you guys to talk more next time. That's sort of how we'll do things. As if you look at the syllabus, you'll see it. But it'll be a lot of Monday will be lecture-y kind of stuff, and then Thursday will be more you guys talking, at least for the next few weeks. I guess I don't need to hit the light. So let's look at the exam, shall we? So one thing I encourage you to think about is, first of all, reflect on what you did to prepare, right? Because again, this is a Buddhist thing, right? Everything is interconnected. With karma, your actions determine your fate, right? And so, you know, what did I do, right? How did I read? I think this is really key. It really just comes down to this. I know some of you are definitely reading, and it was very clear from the exam scores. Some of you are not, also very clear from the exam scores. So this is probably if you're wondering, Bill, how can I do better on the next exam? The first question you got to ask yourself is, am I reading? Or maybe a better question is, how am I reading? Am I doing like 15 minutes before class? Or am I doing like 2 or 3 hours before I go to sleep? Those are very different exercises, right? Am I doing speed read and just getting like a general sense of what's in there? Or am I, you know, eating up every little word? Or am I doing absolutely nothing? Obviously, absolutely nothing, you know, you got to do something, right? And the speed read is better than nothing. Ashoka, right? Who is Ashoka? You look at just sort of the general headers, Sri Lanka, Southeast Asia, you know, you get a sense, China, okay, Buddhism spreads all over Asia. And so even if I just read this for 2 minutes, I could get a sense of what this is about. It's about the spread of Buddhism to all these different parts of Asia. If I had 5 minutes before class and I hadn't done the reading yet, I would do that because, again, it gives me a sense of what's in here. And then I go to the lecture and it helps me fill in the details. So I encourage, again, if it's a choice between nothing and something, always do something. If it's a choice between a little bit and more, do more, right? And you'll do better. Again, that's how I designed the class. And then short term, how did I study? There's open book, open note. There's also a very clear difference between the students that prepared their notes and they had them digitally available so they could search through them during the exam, and those who didn't, right? The students who downloaded all the slides and could search through the slides, and those who didn't, or even maybe copied and pasted the contents from the slides into a Word document and could search through them during the exam and then find all of the quotes that were on the exam. Like I told you, you would be able to do, right? It just comes down to, did you prepare or not, right? And so it really, these are questions you must ask yourself. The other questions, what was tested on the exam? What sort of skills were being tested? This is actually maybe not an obvious question, but again, it's how well do you know the reading? How well do you know the stories? How well can you read on the spot? How well can you read directions? Some of you emailed me and told me how you can't read directions, as if that's my fault, right? So that was not impressive when people emailed me that. So quotation explanations, right? How well can you read? That is part of the exam. Can you read? And I know, you know, that seems obvious, but we're getting worse at reading. I hate to look around and see my students get worse at reading, but it's true. And then the short essays, can you make an argument? Some people said, I'm going to argue that Buddhism is not misogynistic. And then argue, and that is why Buddhism is misogynistic. Is that a good essay? No, it's gotta hold together, people. I know you're at a time constraint, but if you're answering a yes or no question and then you contradict yourself by the end, that's a problem, right? That's a problem. So questions, how can I develop these skills better? That really comes back to you. So I encourage you to reflect on this. We have 12 minutes where I will now cover any specific questions you have. And obviously I'm happy to talk in private if you have anything you want to ask me. One sec. So let's see, that's this class. Exam 1. Okay, so how do I want to do this? Let's go like this. I think this works, right? And so again, you can see all the things I'm asking you to do. You have a very clear sense of what I'm asking you to do, right? There are 10 quotations, there are 2 essays. I asked you, you know, some of them you could just write one word, right? So who said this question? Do I have to write a complete sentence? The Buddha said this quotation. No, write the Buddha. Just write Buddha, right? One word is fine there, right? Save yourself some time. To give an example that demonstrates how one acts with the mind. This was a really interesting one. I gave you what I think is a very clear question. It's more of a command, really. Give an example of acting with the mind. And still, some people are like, you can't act with your mind. You can only think about something and then do with your body, right? It was like not able to compute for probably about half of you. Really, really interesting. You know, say it with me now. Thinking is acting, period. You don't think and then act. Thinking is acting. For the Buddhists, right? You can do whatever the hell you want. But for the Buddhists, thinking is acting. I'll say it again. Thinking is acting. I said this at the beginning of class. I said this when we were going over karma. The whole point of Buddhism, the whole point is to develop your thinking, develop the way you look at the world. If acting with your body and with your speech is the only way to work in the world, who gives a shit about your mind, right? This is the most important thing in Buddhism, is that thinking is acting. If you can't see that, you're really not learning anything from this class, right? Thinking is acting. So the Buddha said it. Most of you got the choice thing, basically making moral choices. This one was really easy. It's his teacher talking about the Buddhism. He's surprised that he knows more than the teacher does. He's still coming to school. This one was interesting. Gautami is saying it to the Buddha. Was Gautami the Buddha's biological mother? Did she give birth to him? No. And so again, we talked about the birth for a whole class on the birth, right? Totally different woman from Gautami. And so this idea of rearing someone, obviously you can look this up. I told you not to use Google, but obviously most of you did. Maybe not most, but a lot of you did. It means to bring up and care for a child until they're fully grown. Does this have anything to do with birth? No, she did not give birth to him. Did not. She took care of him, right? She reared his body, his flesh, and he reared her dharma body. So there's sort of a beautiful poetry here where she took care of his body and he took care of her mind, maybe her spirit, call it what you will. There's misogyny here. How is this misogynistic? There's a sense that women take care of fleshy bodies, men take care of spirits, right? So I encourage you to look for misogyny when you see it. This one was Mara talking to the Buddha, making threats. This one, a lot of people missed. The Buddha talking to Angulimala. It's a very clear question. What must they bear, right? And a lot of you are like, he must bear the consequences of his karma, right? And, you know, when I ask you guys like, hey, you know, Jocelyn, you're looking a little sad today. What's wrong? Are you going to say, well, Bill, I'm bearing the consequences of my karma? No, you wouldn't say that. You'd say what's happening in the scene. Now, obviously, the ones who said that probably didn't read the scene and had no idea what was happening. But what was happening is all these villagers were throwing rocks and sticks at him and were beating him, right? So that's what he had to bear. But what the Buddha was saying is by bearing the consequences of your karma in this life, you will save yourself the consequences of going to hell, right? So it's a scene where he is suffering in this life to save him future problems when he's reborn, right? How are we doing so far? Sorry, I'm getting worked up. I spent all weekend grading these things, so I got a little tired of doing it. This one is the pig mouth, right? It's basically you knew the karma tale or you didn't. I mean, it says it right here, right? I was uncontrolled my speech, I was disciplined in my body, uncontrolled my speech. Because of that, my complexion is like this, just as you see. He's saying something about his complexion. What was his complexion? That's the question, right? It was golden. What was wrong with his because of his speech. What was wrong with him? He had a pig mouth, right? That was the whole gist of the story. It was 2 pages in the Karma Tales. You either knew it or you didn't. Some people put stuff like, well, if you do stuff bad with your mouth, then you have consequences of that. If you do good stuff with your body, there are consequences of that. And I said, okay, fine, have a point. But at the end, you're just demonstrating that you have no idea what the answer is. So this one, again, very straightforward, is basically the Buddha saying some people doubt that women can achieve enlightenment, talking to Gautami. He says, perform some miracles. Some of you wrote it was a miracle that a woman could become a nun or something like that, and that didn't make any sense to me. She performed miracles. She like made fireworks appear in the sky. She's flying all over the place. She duplicates herself. Magic and miracles, right? Again, you sort of, it's just, did you know what was going on or you didn't? That's sort of how this whole part goes. This is Angulimala planning to kill the Buddha. Some people thought this idea of taking the recluse's life, I didn't imagine this, but this is how some people read it, as like taking on the life of an ascetic, and which of course is totally wrong. But this is talking about killing someone, right? Talking about killing the Buddha. This one, some people sort of missed. I was very generous really throughout, but I was very generous with this one in particular. He saw the holy man, right? He saw the person meditating, surrounded by all this suffering. Why was he surprised? Because when you learn that you're going to die, how can you be at peace with that? He found someone who's at peace with the fact that they're going to die one day. Most of us just actively ignore it, right? Whenever anything reminds us that we're going to die one day, we say that's morbid, la la la, I'm not going to die one day, I'm going to live forever. Here is somebody who's at peace with this idea, and he found this inspiring, and he wanted to figure out how to do that himself. This one was probably I told you this, the Buddha's final words. I really kind of fed it to you in class. Of course, this is important. This will probably be on the, I don't think I said it'll probably be on the exam, but when I say something's really important and you should really pay attention to it, that means it will definitely be on the exam. Not definitely, but probably. And this is what I would argue is the major takeaway from early Buddhism, is that all things are impermanent, right? And that's 1B is all things are impermanent. And 1C is the harder question is, what do you do about it? Some people wrote very inspiring answers, and I loved grading this part of the exam because like, oh yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly what you should be doing. Some people were totally lost. And again, it's sad because I can see people like copying and pasting the Four Noble Truths from their notes, but they have nothing to say about this, which again, makes me feel like I have failed you because you've learned nothing useful in this class. But you know, what can I do, right? I can only give you so much. So what is this idea of vigilance all about? It's paying attention in life. Some people wrote in all caps, pay attention, which of course is exactly what I'm doing right now, is saying in all caps, pay attention. Pay attention, right? Pay attention to your exam. Why did you do so poorly? Because you messed around? Because I'm unfair to you? No. You just got to do the work, right? Just do the work. Come to class, pay attention. I know it's early. I know it's a stressful time and there are things hanging on all of us, but pay attention, right? Pay attention and life will be better. I promise. In fact, this again, it's the major takeaway from this first part of the class. Pay attention to life. The causes and effects of the things that happen in your life. Okay, and then finally, there were 2 short essays. Some people claimed that this was confusing. I apologize if it was. It's basically just choose 2 essays, write 2 essays, right? And so the first one is about the gods. I already mentioned that before. I basically just wanted to make you think, oh yeah, there are gods in Buddhism. How about that? That's sort of interesting, right? Because they are all over the place. Could you identify 2 specific examples, which is basically testing, did you read and understand the story? Or come to class and understand what we talk about in class, because this one you could totally have answered without ever cracking the book. The second one, misogynistic, again, we talked about it in class. This one, I was a little more picky about what sources you use to support your point, right? Because again, if you just copy and paste from the slides without having a sense of how these things fit together, I was very unimpressed, right? Because again, what it tells me is you didn't do any of the reading and you just were copying and pasting from the slides. Fine, you probably got like 18 out of 20 if you copied and pasted from the slides. So I wasn't hitting anybody with hammers here. And then finally, the Four Noble Truths. Were you able to understand them and apply them to the life story of the Buddha? I said one specific scene. Most people just kind of babbled out, yeah, here are the Four Noble Truths, and here's some blah, 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 and didn't really connect them very interestingly. again, you probably got 18 or 19 if you did that. But what I really wanted to see is suffering. Here's what suffering is. It's craving, right? It's these negative desires and negative attachments. Here's a scene in the life story of the Buddha where that's illustrated, right? Get into some detail. Get your hands a little dirty, right? Connect things in a meaningful way rather than just sort of babble them off. Now, obviously, like we said before, you probably ran out of time. So again, I didn't hate on anybody. I tried to make this pretty easy for you guys. I tried to be pretty generous. I tried to be very clear with the instructions. And as a result, most of you did very well. I guess we can start with this one, right? We had 20 A's. So, when I design exams, I like a bell curve, right? That's sort of what teachers go for. So when I see this, I think this is way too damn easy. If half of the class is getting an A, 7 A pluses, so that means 98 or above. So 7 people basically missed like one little thing. And 9 people missed maybe 2 or 3 little things, right? 4 people missed maybe 4 or 5 little things, right? And then it kind of trails off from there. Obviously, this section, we're just not on the bus, right? And so there's a certain number of folks who just need to get on the bus. Folks in the middle, I think what it shows to me is probably a question of notes, right? Is getting the notes together because, again, this is open note, timed exam. And so part of the process is just test taking skills, right? Are you able to perform under these constraints? Now you have a better sense of what it is like to take one of these exams. I've tried to warn you and tell you what to expect, but now you know from experience. So we have 1 minute left. Any questions? Specific things I didn't go over? Anything specific about the exam? General things about the exam? How do we feel? So again, looking forward, you can do better on the next one, right? There is a way, and I'm happy to talk about this with you too. If you didn't do as well as you would have liked and you're not sure what to do, again, this is where teachers come in because you can't always see the connections and stuff. Like I can say, hey, look, tell me about your study habits. Tell me about your week. Tell me about how things fit together. We can come up with a plan together. So I'm here for you. If you don't have any more questions, let's call it a day. And now you are done with your exam. You don't have to worry about it. It's not this time. But do keep up with the reading, because like I said, there'll be another one. All right, goodbye, everybody. Have a good day.